Hello and welcome to this special episode of Mission Makers, brought to you from Davos, Switzerland, where I was lucky enough to be moderating a week of panels in the mountains at the Lan Space Summit, which took place during the World Economic Forum earlier this year. It was a huge project and I spent close to a year curating the programme for the summit, which was a gathering to collaborate on the most pressing issues of our current and future generations, converging the frontiers of technology and humanity to showcase the cultural essence of life in an immersive, elevated experience. We had some incredible speakers at our summit, from Deepak Chopra to the first African woman to pilot a spacecraft, Dr.Sian Proctor, and many other visionaries and thought leaders. I'll be sharing a few highlights from our panel discussions over the next few weeks, so stay tuned and let's dive straight into today's episode. Gaia and Kamran, it is wonderful to be back on air with you guys. We had an absolute blast moderating the panels in Davos during the World Economic Forum, and I wanted to really talk today about what on earth that was like. How did we end up moderating panels in Davos, which is really the gold standard of panel discussions? What tips do we have for our audience? What were some of the hardest things that we felt we experienced during the moderation? And I think what's really interesting about this year's Davos was that for the first time in more than the 50-year history of these Davos meetings, the WEF wasn't being held in its usual, time of January, where it's, beautifully, it's a beautiful time of the year, but it's obviously much more logistical with the snow and everything else. So this year, it took place in May. The birds were singing and chirping, and it was, many summer days. And of course, the reason for this was because the last two WEFs were basically postponed because of the COVID pandemic. So it was, remarkable time. Also, there was a lot of, with the things happening geopolitically, it was a very, very sensitive time to be meeting, as well at such a, powerful and impactful place. And I guess one of the challenges about that was that, all event organizers in Davos had about 2 months to prepare for something of this caliber, which would normally take easily a year, to prepare and plan for. So, definitely added quite a lot of pressure on us. But let's kind of kick it off with, how did we sort of really begin this process? Because I think one of the most kind of the thing that I really enjoyed was that we as a team had full creative control over the programming of this of the land space. And that's why, I really wanted to bring both of you guys in, because I really respect your kind of approach to things. And I also really love the way that you guys interact and kind of create that engagement. So yeah, let's talk about, the beginning stages, like how that all kind of came together. Maybe Kamran, you can kickstart the discussion.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was really exciting for me, especially given the amount of creative control that you had over the entire event. It's not often that someone calls you up and says, I can, literally set the tone of the entire event over a 5-day period. It's usually conferences which are over a much shorter period, 2 or 3 days maximum. So for you to be in charge of the entire 5-day agenda and having a different theme for each day was just the kind of guardrails that we needed, without feeling like we were limited in terms of the topics of discussion. But the themes that you had set for each day, I think those were brilliant, because those really guided us in terms of what topics we can pick, or we should pick within those themes. So everything from disruptive decentralization through to sustainability, so many really impactful or important topics. So I think we had just the right amount of freedom, which was quite a lot actually, to decide what were the individual panel discussion topics that would get the most, that would give us enough time to discuss the most pertinent issues in each of those subjects. So yeah, I thought it was amazing to have this much control over what we discuss and who we discuss it with and who we invite onto those panels. And your captive database of speakers and guests and panelists was amazing. So that also enabled us to really go wild with the questions that we prepared for each panel discussion. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, definitely 100% agree. And Gaia, anything to kind of add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Kamran, you really encapsulated it, because it was really when Farah, you got in touch with this like beautiful white canvas, basically, of this 5-day period, some key ideas, some key topics we wanted to discuss. But as you said, Kamran, it was the beauty, but also the challenge of putting it all together, especially if you consider that we started brainstorming on this, when was it? Probably March, mid-March. So we didn't have that much time. There was a lot of time pressure. So many things we wanted to talk about, and we kind of had to find the right angles to have a fresh approach to some of the topics, because obviously the level of the conversations happening in Davos is so high that you really want to match that. And it was beautiful also to see how some of our ideas, the ideas we first discussed among the three of us, eventually evolved and changed when we started connecting with the people who eventually became the panelists, and they brought in their own expertise and ideas and views on the topic. So we really shaped together what the angle was going to be, the questions that we picked. And yes, it was just great to see how everything went from a Google document with all the notes and ideas to a live panel in this beautiful venue in central Davos.
100%. Yeah, it's amazing seeing, things like that spring to life in such a big way. And just talking through the days, I will just kind of retouch upon what those themes were for our audience who may not be aware. So we started off on Friday, the 20th of May, and that was a day really for us to welcome our audience and really kind of set the tone. And one of the core values of the Lan Space is really mindfulness. We are a community that really cares about well-being, about leadership that's mindful. So we wanted to kind of really open the space with like a group meditation, have light frequency healing, and really prepare our minds for like this level of discussion and interaction that's going to take place. Because as you guys probably figured out, I would actually say that this year's Davos was more relaxed, and that might sound surprising because it was 100% hectic and I needed like a month off after May. But actually, normally in January, it's like maybe double, if not triple, a bit more busier. And so delegates are running around. They're trying to fit in at least 30 to 40 events a day. And I remember we already had so many events we were trying to fit in. Yeah, so that was good in that sense, because people were able to stay in the room for a lot longer, and so we could really have a deeper level conversation. And so yeah, moving on to the first technical day really of the conference was the dawn of a new era. And something that we wanted to weave through this whole program was an exploration also of the chakras. So we started with the root, we moved on to the sacral chakra, solar plexus, heart chakra, and so on and so forth. And so each day had a specific chakra, and the way that we were integrating that was with a meditation, with quantum healing. We had an amazing facilitator who came in from Germany, I think it was, to even do workshops on like the consciousness of plants, and things like that. And then the following day we talked about, so the first day we talked about the dawn of a new era, right? Like we really are meeting at, such a intersection of history. Like it's this, what's been happening in the last 2-3 years is, it's unprecedented, as cliched as that word is these days, or overused. But, we wanted to use that data to set the context of where we were, and the legacy that COVID has had on us, and deglobalization. We then moved on to creativity and the spiritual codes of success. Another, interesting thing about the Lan Space is that there's many creatives who come through, who are in her audience, and we felt like it would be really nice to have a dedicated day for that. So, we talked about the impact of creativity and the pandemic, spiritual recovery through the arts, cultural leadership in times of crisis, One of my personal favorites was Harmony of the Mind, and this amazing workshop we did with this guy who plugged in this device that was able to read body frequencies and turn that into synthesizer, and basically would be reading the notes of your body and in real time turning that into like a flute or, you know, something that was just mind-blowing. Then we went into Tuesday, which was disruptive decentralization. So we needed a dedicated day for, I mean, so much happening in technology, right? We're on that wave of a new revolution. So it's very important to have a dedicated day for like Web3, DAOs, metaverse, crypto, all of those things. And then, yeah, we're now sort of almost at the halfway point, which was sustainability and solidarity on Wednesday. A full day for that, and thinking about topics like indigenous knowledge and how to harness technology to act on the climate crisis, how space can contribute to the UN's SDGs. We were lucky to be joined by an astronaut for that panel. Web3 for the greater good. And you know, maybe a lot of you guys know on the show, obviously I come from a motorsports background. So I really wanted to talk about also how motorsports can impact the future of mobility. And then our final day, which was the Thursday, was the future of leadership. So kind of closing it out on, you know, that sort of note of, first of all, even thinking about, for example, the Montessori mindset and how that can, you know, enable future generations to thrive, leading with empathy and empowerment, shaping the future of climate crisis, building a financially responsible mindset amongst Generation Z. And then, you know, we were very lucky that day to also have Deepak Chopra in the space, to really close the space out for us. So, you know, it was a very full-rounded spectrum. And as you guys said, like, so much to talk about. And I think every day needed its own dedicated space. So yeah, that was a high-level overview of the program. And so let's talk about, you know, the actual experience of moderating. For you guys, what was the most surprising thing about moderating in such a setting? And maybe Gaia, we can start with you.
Definitely. Picking on, just as I was listening to you, sort of like recapping everything that's been going on during those days, and it sounds better and better every time I, you know, hear the whole lineup and all the topics we touched upon. And I just wanted to add that it was great to see how our three different backgrounds. So Farah, you're closer to maybe the creative world, music industry, the motorsport businesses. Kamran comes from a more finance and legal background. I tend to focus on technology and sustainability. They all merged perfectly. It's almost as if we had all the expertise needed to cover all the key topics we wanted to talk about. And yet maybe something that was surprising to me, but like in a good way, is that all those topics, all those angles, all those conversations were connected, were linked to each other. So even two people coming from completely different backgrounds were referencing some of their obvious latest innovation, or maybe some of the approaches, like, for example, humanizing technology, or the importance that Web3 is going to have in different fields. So going from financial services to sustainability to the creative industry. So I think it was very fascinating, and something I did not expect, to see how all the dots connected perfectly during the conference. So that was really great to witness when, you know, as we were going along with panel after panel, different audiences, different guests in the room, but some of the key ideas, key topics, and really this feeling that something big is happening. Some conversations are all leading to the right way, to the right things that need to be addressed. So that was a really good surprise for me.
Nice. And Kamran?
Yeah, for me, I was just blown away by how open people were on the panels. There was no level of political correctness that you would find in a major conference, an industry conference, or a specialized conference. People were really transparent with their views. They did not hold back. It's almost as if though, because this was a non-World Economic Forum Davos gathering, they were more willing to share their real feelings. They were not dressing things up, padding the message. softening the blow. They were just telling it as it was, and people were openly airing their frustrations. And there are so many frustrations to air about the topics that we covered, everything from cryptocurrency to NFTs to governance of digital communities. There were so many opinions that I loved the fact that the panelists didn't feel like they had the time or the inclination to dress it up and soften the message, because they really wanted to have a proper discussion about it and a debate. And that triggered brilliant interaction with the audiences to ask real questions, as opposed to people worried about the press monitoring them, because there were no press organizations that I can think of in recording our panel discussions. So it felt like Chatham House rules applied in those debates, and Chatham House rules are so important for real discussions to take place. And I felt like we had that. So that's what really surprised me. I didn't think Davos would be the place where people opened their hearts and emotions and started really voicing their deep opinions. But I was very pleased to see that it was.
Yeah, definitely. I think, given the caliber and the level of discussions that we wanted to host, and I think, we all said at the beginning of this when we got together, was that we want these panels to be thought-provoking and disruptive. We don't want this to be your general thing that you can hear in any other conference around the world. Like, this has to be, it has to have that level of disruption. And also, one of the main reasons for that is because we want to shift the energy, right, of leaders. There's obviously a lot that's wrong right now in the world, and in order for us to do that, we need a private space to be able to have those conversations. We had press, our event was covered in Bloomberg and several major publications, but it was more of a general coverage of the event, rather than this is what was said and let's break the headlines because this was said, right? In fact, what was surprising to me was that when we got the opportunity to interview Deepak Chopra, I was absolutely surprised that it was his first Davos. I mean, a guy of his nature who's quite passionate about also shifting this energy. It was interesting to be able to talk to him in his first Davos experience. So, moderating is not obviously an easy job. Then there's definitely an art of moderation. And sometimes, we've probably all been at these conferences where it's like, these things can be better, right? And that kind of interactivity is missing. So what would you both say as tips for anyone in our audience listening who's looking to level up their public speaking, or is in the beautiful position to moderate panels? What tips would you give them for being a good moderator? Kamran, let's start with you.
Okay, so rule number one, the panelists have to see you as a peer. They cannot see you as a clueless, media personality or isolated host who's just reeling off a bunch of questions from a piece of paper. If anything, that will destroy the conversation. The panelist is a key, the moderator is a key member of the discussion, is an absolutely key member of the discussion. It's the moderator's job to call out BS if they hear it on the stage. You have to humiliate people in public. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean humiliate as in question the route, because that person has been chosen for that panel for a reason. Clearly they are qualified or have achieved something in that industry, that specialization, that field of specialty to be called onto the stage to discuss it with other experts. I'm not saying the moderator has to be a subject matter expert, world-renowned, respected in that subject. But if the moderator cannot ask the difficult questions and call out substandard answers or subpar answers to those questions, then it will not be at the level that the discussion needs to be at for it to be certainly, a discussion in a high-profile event or a high-profile location. And it's an insult to the people in the audience if someone's just allowed to, reel off their opinions and sometimes actually irrelevant opinions which are not linked to the question which is being asked by the moderator. So rule number one, the moderator has to be seen as a peer by the panelists in terms of their level of awareness about the issues facing that industry or that topic of discussion. The moderator has to know what is going on in that industry or that area of discussion. They have to know what the concerns of the stakeholders are in that area of discussion. So it could, for example, we were talking about, I moderated a panel on crypto, blockchain, and NFTs, and the future prospects for these asset classes. And so much had happened in the few days before this panel discussion. We had Terra USD, we had hundreds of millions of dollars wiped off the market because of what was perceived to be fraudulent activities, what was perceived to be criminal activity. So if I wasn't aware of those activities, I wouldn't have been in a position to really press the panel, who are all pro crypto, on is this really a long-term sustainable institutional retail friendly asset class, or is this just a casino, a giant casino? So the moderator has to be aware about the latest developments in a sector or industry in order to put pressure on those panelists to get admissions of where there are lackings from industry participants in that specific field. So that's tip number two. And tip number three is just research. I mean, maybe it's the same advice twice, but you just have to be aware of what's going on in that industry or that area of that's being discussed. Otherwise, you will not meaningfully contribute to the discussion. You will not be asking the right questions. It would actually turn off not just panelists but members of the audience, and that would be the ultimate failure. So, as a moderator, it's your primary role to stimulate discussion by asking the most pertinent, pressing questions, no matter how uncomfortable it is to ask those questions. You may insult people on the panel. You may even cause discomfort amongst the panelists. On several of my panels, people were totally taken aback because I had asked questions which were not on the script. And several of them were not prepared. And it really exposed them. Am I okay with exposing people in a public forum? Sometimes, yes, because their opinions have to be substantiated with deep knowledge and expertise. And if you cannot display that knowledge and expertise, you will be exposed. So yeah, so I hope that helps answer the question.
Fantastic tips. I love it. And I absolutely I love the way you moderate. So it's really interesting to be in a room when you're moderating. But brilliant tips. How about you, Gaia?
Yeah, I think Kamran pretty much summarized it all. But what I may add is that it's really about the flow of the conversation. I guess different panels have different flows, and it depends on the number of people on the panel, the topic. Sometimes even the demographic of the panel could change the conversation, the sort of like intimacy that it can be created, or the more like interaction that happens with the audience. So sometimes you don't even get to the Q&A session because it's so interactive that you feel the energy in the room. And I feel like being a moderator is quite challenging, but also very fascinating because you get to witness this energy building up and in a way to control it and direct it, minding the time, minding your list of questions, as Kamran mentioned, being on alert because you may want to ask a follow-up question because you picked something there and you know that if you won't ask that question, sometimes uncomfortable, or sometimes just something you didn't think about when you were preparing that session, but that came up during the conversation, or you just feel it's very interesting. And yeah, 100%, as Kamran mentioned, you need to ask it, because you may be ending up losing or missing out on something very poignant for the conversation. And on top of keeping up with the most recent events, I'd also say to extensively research the panel. This way you can tailor better your questions. Maybe you can keep asking similar questions, but with different angles, to sort of really bring up the different opinions and different ideas that the panelists may have. And at some point, you may even allow them to interact with each other and recreate a more dynamic conversation. So it's not just a series of interviews, but it's more like a proper discussion happening there on stage. And yeah, as I said, I think the best ones are when the audience feels involved as well and feels the urge to ask questions, or like they start holding their hands up way before you start taking on questions. So that's really when the moderator has to sort of direct and channel the energy in the best way.
Yeah, definitely. I think you guys have both covered some really, really good tips. And as you know, rightly so, it is the role of the moderator to weave that chemistry and to guide and stimulate that discussion. At the same time, I think also, like, it's really important in advance, if you have the opportunity to actually connect with those people one-to-one, on a call. Because I think it's, if you can have that opportunity to know that person's chemistry, to understand what they're passionate about, it just helps make a better conversation. It's harder when you don't know someone to immediately go straight into that red seat and make it happen. And of course, in our situation, we definitely didn't have the opportunity to speak to every single person on Zoom, but we certainly tried to speak to as many as we could. And if not be able to speak to them, we had a very, very comprehensive and well-managed sheet where, they could see their questions, they could contribute, the context was there. So they know what we ultimately want to kind of get out of this discussion, but also provide the space for them to critique it as well. As Kamran said, though, as well, very good to surprise them. And you can't just stick to the script. That's boring. You want this to be a natural conversation. Things will come out and you need to be able to feed off that energy, and also surprise them. And in a way, as you say, catch them a little bit off guard. The last thing I will add is that in context to that is also, for a lot of people, like, doing these kinds of panels, maybe it's not something they do that often. So they are not going to be like all the time as good of a public speaker as maybe your moderator, because this, maybe they do these things 2-3 times a year, right? And so for some people, it is a nerve-wracking experience. Like, they definitely want to be there, they want to get that opportunity, but at the same time, we do need to make them feel quite relaxed. And the most important part in all of that is like enabling trust between all of us. So of course, on the one hand, going through the disruptive route of uncomfortable conversations, but there still needs to be trust and that feeling amongst everyone. So yeah, and then of course, also just following up and just making sure that people know that their time was valued, and just the simple basic things. What would you say was the hardest part of moderating in Davos? Gaia, let's start with you.
I think specifically because of the buzziness of Davos, you never ever fully have control of what's going on. So guests may not show up because their day just took an unexpected turn, or they're stuck somewhere else in another conference, in a very insightful conversation, and they just don't realize. So we had a couple of people not showing up when they were supposed to be on stage. That's quite stressful, because obviously if one of your panelists is missing, everything gets very intense. You start texting, getting in touch with them, the session is about to start. So I think we managed to handle that quite well, because we had a dedicated team of people sort of keeping in touch with the panelists, and welcome them to the venue, and sort of introduce them straight away to the moderator for that session. But obviously there's always something that could go wrong, or things happen basically. So I guess that's the most nerve-wracking experience, when someone doesn't show up, and in that case you just, the show goes on, you just go on without that specific panelist. Or something that happened at the Lan Space actually is that someone else who was maybe in the previous panel and was very sort of an expert in that field and equipped with the right knowledge to join the conversation and take that seat and sort of like bring that forward. So I think, that was a little bit of improvising we did on a couple of occasions, but I guess especially in Davos, this is something that probably you have to take into account, because it's so busy and time is so precious in Davos that people sometimes have to juggle different things at the same time. And you just need to be prepared if that happens.
Yeah, definitely. And it has a knock-on effect, because then the graphic designer needs to know they need to change the document. And in this case, it was us who was having to change those things, adds extra pressure to us. The tech team, all of that stuff, it just is an extra level of complexity. How about you, Kamran? What do you think was the hardest part about moderating?
There was, it is quite difficult to manage the conversation when certain panelists have a very low energy, and they're only interested in answering the question and then moving on to the next question. The best panel discussions are the ones where the panelists are bouncing off each other. They're answering each other's questions. They're really keen to actually talk about the topic with each other, not just answer questions being thrown at them by the moderator and going in turns to answer the same question. So when you have panelists who are really reserved or institutionalized, and so they're very measured with their words, then they don't want to, either they're not opinionated, that's the worst. If they're not opinionated, but if they are opinionated but they don't want to share those opinions openly on such a platform, that's another problem. Low energy levels, people who just want to answer the questions, that's not the kind of panelist that makes for a really interesting or lively discussion. Now, I'm not saying the discussion needs to be lively just for the sake of being lively. There are, if you watch a Federal Reserve press conference, the most, the energy level is extremely low, but the level of interest in what they have to say it's followed by millions of people around the world. So I'm not suggesting that energy levels are required just for the sake of it, but it's difficult to manage panelists who don't want to have a discussion, and they see it more as an interview alongside other people. That's slightly difficult to manage.
I'd argue that sometimes you also get the opposite problem when some panelists would just go on and on and on forever. They have so much to say, and it's usually so interesting. You feel bad to stop them, or like try to, make sure everybody has enough time to express all they have to say. Or
Absolutely.
Sometimes the clock is ticking, so the session is about to end. It's difficult because you don't want to take it off them or stop them when you're about to make a really interesting point, but you also need to make sure everything runs smoothly. So it's a bit difficult to, you could have both ends of the spectrum, basically.
I agree fully. You have to become an expert at stopping people from talking. I mean, it seems rude to stop someone in their tracks but if they're going off topic, it is beyond important to stop them, because that will affect the entire dynamic of the discussion. If people keep going on tangents, then it affects the moderator's ability to keep the dialogue going in a specific direction. And the worst thing is to have one panelist carry on and on and on about something which is not even relevant. And so I totally agree with Gaia that managing those personalities is very important, and it's not easy sometimes to do that.
Exactly. And I think this is where, again, it comes down to, if you have the opportunity to speak to those people in advance, you can kind of get a gauge. But it is difficult, and managing the time is one of the most difficult parts, I think, in that. sphere. I think personally for me, one of the hardest parts was just given the level of intensity of this, this week, was maintaining the energy, throughout that whole week. Because I mean, I was wearing a few hats, like I wasn't just moderation, but there were times where I had to say to Gaia, like, look, do you think you could just take this panel for me? Because I just know that like my energy just isn't there. Like it's too, I need time to regenerate. And it's hard because you're I mean, I know that that week we were getting like I was getting like 2 to 4 hours sleep a day. And it's the pressure point towards the end was like, it was like a climax, right? Like Deepak Chopra is our final closing speaker. I mean, you need some seriously good energy to be, in that once in a lifetime seat. So yeah, maintaining energy levels when it's such a lengthy conference and there's so much to talk about was for me one of the hardest parts. So moving from hard to easy, what was the easiest part for you, Kamran? What did you find the most easiest part of moderating Davos?
Of moderating, striking a rapport with most of the panelists was quite easy, and I was very happy by that, because everyone spoke excellent English. I mean, there were some very heavy European accents on the stage at several points, but everyone spoke English well enough to be able to strike for me to build a rapport with them quite quickly. I don't think I even though I pushed a lot of people in directions which they may not wanted to have gone in, I didn't get any complaints about inappropriate questions, thank God. But I remember Nik Gowing, a BBC veteran. He's the only person who challenged me on stage when I called the Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, a black swan incident or an event, black swan event. I believe he challenged me on the spot and said that he didn't believe that was a black swan event, because he had seen the signs for the last 25 years of this crisis coming up and Russia going into Ukraine. And so it was really nice to be challenged on stage. I didn't see it as someone trying to second guess me or someone trying to humiliate me. No, that is the essence of a good debate, is people catching each other out or challenging each other on the spot, because that's when people get really comfortable with each other and can openly contribute. So yeah, so for the easiest thing for me was to build rapport and get people to talk about the most pressing issue within a topic of discussion, because these were industry practitioners, they were subject matter experts, so it shouldn't be difficult to get them to talk about their area of expertise. Yes, it's sometimes difficult to get controversial opinions out of them, that's true, but it's easy to get them to talk about the topic. So so I guess that was the easy thing for me. Nice.
And how about you, Gaia?
I guess in my case, I mentioned that earlier, but very specific to this experience, it was the team, I guess. We had a larger team of AV people and events managers, but particularly when it comes to the three of us, it was very easy, not simple, but easy and smooth to put together so much in such a short amount of time. And I felt like the conversations among the three of us were always very open. We were able to offer feedback to each other on like previous sessions, or even at the very early stages. We were connected enough and we had such a good chemistry going on that we were able to sort of pick on somebody's idea, but then bring it forward and give honest opinions to each other on what we thought about the lineup of speakers, or, a specific topic, or a way we could talk about an angle in a more like punchy or maybe with a fresher approach. So it was a lot of like learning as well. For me, it was great to see things from different points of view, from someone like you, Farah, who has been at Davos before, so knew already what to expect and the sort of like level of conversations happening, and was very familiar with the venue and the sort of people that we would have had in the audience. And you, Kamran, brought in a lot of expertise on geopolitical matters, and you had really good suggestions on speakers we could onboard. So I think it was easy in a way that I didn't, it was scary when we approached it, but it went very smooth. Little sleep, a lot of pressure, but I think it was really good energy, and I'm very satisfied with the final result.
Nice. Yeah, I think, looking back, like, I mean, I've been sort of living between Davos and London since last October for this project. And in March, when, because we actually did do an event out in January for during that time, even though WEF got cancelled. And I will make a confession that I was never meant to be a moderator in Davos. It was a funny coincidence because in January, Lan said to me, because I was there to perform some music and potentially do this podcast idea with her, a separate podcast we're producing for the Lan Space. And she said to me, cause someone pulled out, and she said to me, Ninja, like with literally 1 day's notice, like our event in January was 2 days, so it wasn't the full spectrum like we had, but she was like, can you moderate this entire conference? And I literally had 1 or 2 days to come up with the entire questions. So like day one was a bit easier for me because it was more about the creative subjects. Day 2 was like finance. It's not my subject area of expertise at all. And so, but I really enjoyed it, actually, the whole process. I came away from it thinking, wow, like that was my favorite part of this whole experience, and so naturally it all sort of evolved, and it went down this path of like, okay, can you take the lead role on like curating this entire thing, the program and all that? What I will say is that, and then in March, it was announced that, in 2 months, we're going to have the World Economic Forum happening. At that point, I felt like, I'm standing at the base of a really tall and difficult and steep mountain, because the complexities of organizing something of this scale is unlike any other, even to the point that like getting Deepak Chopra was a surprise, like, and we had, again, like 2-3 days to prepare for that question, for that interview, and we didn't have time because we were already in the full event. There was no time to just take an hour off to go to an office and just sit down. So those are some of the hard things, but the easiest part then, looking back at all of that, was because we're thinking we basically had about 25 panels. It's quite a lot. And surprisingly, what I thought would be the hardest, which was getting the speakers, was actually the easiest, because all of the most amazing minds are in Davos during that time. And we were getting flooded with requests, like people sending us their bios and like, just, I mean, really stellar, sort of people. Right. And so actually that was the easiest part, was like getting the subject matters to be there and to be part of the conversation. What would you guys say? Any tips for like people who haven't been to Davos? Anything that you would advise them as a general tip, just attending, speaking, whatever? And Kamran, we can start with you first.
Okay, so it depends on in what capacity you're going to Davos. The World Economic Forum is obviously very well structured, and you have probably 2 or 3 hours in the evening, maybe 3-4, to meet a lot of people that you need to meet. It's not supposed to be a holiday. It's supposed to be intense. It's supposed to be where you meet as many people as you can in those few days. So my advice, if you're going as an attendee, is to pre-organize your meetings as much as you can, because you need to catch people that you otherwise would not be able to catch. And seeing someone in Davos is different to seeing them anywhere else. So I would say pre-organize your itinerary and do things together with people that you want to build a relationship with. Invite people for dinner or lunch that you want to build a relationship with, or you're trying to raise capital from, or you're trying to introduce an idea to, or you're trying to win a contract from. It's the perfect place for short meetings, like 30 to 45 minute sort of power meetings, and you can do so many of those a day. I mean, most CEOs are doing well in excess of 15 meetings a day because they're keeping them very short and sweet. And and of course attend networking events where you can meet other people. But just remember that Davos attracts people from every single industry you can think of. So if you're not focused in your networking, you're probably not gonna meet relevant people. So be very aware of the fact that the networking has to be focused networking, preferably even pre-organized networking, where you tell someone, is there anyone if you're raising funding for your startup company, for example, you should tell the investors that you are meeting, is there anyone else that you think I should see who's coming to Davos? So that kind of forward planning will, otherwise, if you don't forward plan it in so meticulously, the few days will be over before they've even started, because that's how fast things happen once the week starts. And I would say if you're moderating, then just enjoy it, but do a lot of research to ask heavy-hitting, pertinent questions, so that you will earn the respect of the panelists even before the discussion even starts. If you do that organization call beforehand. And finally, if you're an executive and you're going to Davos, just differentiate between people that you can meet or see at any other time of the year, and just keep them off the list of meetings to do while you're in Davos, and focus on people that you will not catch, or it will be very difficult to catch anywhere else throughout the year. That would be my overall advice.
Nice. I actually wanted to touch upon what you said there, because you mentioned it earlier that, like, it's true, like some of the interviews we see in the media or even the panels, when that moderator is not from that subject expertise, it's just it's boring, and it doesn't do anyone justice, the brand, the panelists, the audience, and I think the best ones that we see are the people that really understand that subject matter. So definitely, and 100% about being organized, about pre-planning your event schedule. How about you, Gaia? Anything to add to that tips part of Davos?
Those were really, really good tips. I endorse them all. I totally agree with Kamran. So I'm gonna offer a few fun tips. I'd say beyond doing everything that Kamran said, I'd also add go to the parties, because obviously when a small town is full of young dynamic people who are there for business, are there for media, are there for research, whatever it's their association with the WEF or Davos in general or any other satellite event, there's so many parties happening, whether it's dinners, DJ sets, networking events, but really the after hours at Davos are really fun, but also very, very useful to connect with people in a more maybe informal way, in a more intimate way, because you can maybe go for a walk, or sort of bring those conversations that maybe happened in settings during another event and they were very timed. Then you can just have the evening and maybe a nice dinner or a nice DJ set to bring those forward. And so I say do go to the parties, they're really fun. And always, maybe if possible, at the end of the conference, keep a free day, because the nature around Davos is so beautiful, and I really regret I didn't have that day, especially May, because you could do hikes and see the nature and see pristine water and everything, and in the winter it'd be perfect for skiing and any other snow sports. So I'd say keep that day, and probably arrive after a few days of rest, good sleep, because you'll need it to power through the whole conference.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, Kamran, my sister and I had an amazing hike in the mountains. I mean, we won't talk about what happened on that hike.
I think we enjoyed it a bit too much that day with the incident in the mountain. I don't know if we can talk about it.
But we won't talk about it. That's off air. That's between what happened in the mountains, stays in the mountains. But let's just say we had an amazing off-road adventure, and it's one we won't forget. But most importantly, we were all just our jaws were dropping, when we got out of the car and we saw just the most incredible mountains. I mean, and you don't see that in the town, because the town is the town, and it's you know, of course you see the mountains, but it's not like actually taking the hike and going out there, especially in May. I would say, you know, in terms of, you know, tips for people who are going to Davos, yeah, number one, obviously the events. So where do you find those side events? Of course, a lot of the impact and the networking happens at these after hours. So Eventbrite, number one, loads of events, all events, frankly, are, apart from the WEF related events, are on there. There's also an app called Davos X, which updates its schedule about a month. It drops all the announcements of the events happening, including the parties, about a month in advance of the actual thing. And you can you have to apply to go to a lot of these ones, but they're, you know, they're not complicated to apply for. Secondly, book things in advance. So if you're doing things like dinners with important CEOs, make sure you book, because needless to say, supply versus demand, there just isn't enough supply for the amount of people out there. And you know, also you're in a unique opportunity where you can have the most amazing scenic meetings. Like I remember, you guys may know on this podcast, Tessie de Nassau, who's now one of my best friends, closest allies in business as well. Our first ever meeting properly was at 3,000 meters up in the Swiss Alps in Davos. You know, an incredible restaurant. Bill Gates was in that restaurant like an hour earlier. I mean, these are just things you just don't experience in day life. And even during this year's Davos, I remember having, you know, lunch again with the astronaut, Sian Proctor, again, you know, 3,000 meters up. You know, it was just, I mean, these are just once in a lifetime type of opportunity. So you need to book those things in these hotels. Thirdly, also, of course, this year was in May, but generally it's in January. And as someone who unfortunately broke their arm in Davos, or their elbow, I have to just flag this up right now. You need to take appropriate gear. And I'm someone who absolutely loves skiing. Like, you know, I'm familiar with the winter climate, and even I broke my elbow, not even skiing, just literally walking in the main road, slipping on some black ice that was underneath some snow. And that is just the worst situation. On that note, I've actually, since that experience, you know, I've spoken to a few people who've unfortunately, you know, had injuries in the mountains, whether it's skiing or not. And they've all told me like they would never have an operation in the actual hospitals in the mountains because the experts are not there. And unfortunately, it happened to me where my elbow surgery was done wrong in Davos. I had to pay a fortune, and it was just, you know, it took me 10 months, and it was just, I'm still going through physio. So make sure if you're going in January, you have all of that stuff. Then
safety first.
Yeah, safety first, because it's over before it even begins, you know, in my case. And in 2020 that was. Then I would also say, just given the, you know, overwhelming amount of events, information, people, and all that stuff. And I'm an introvert, so like for me, it's a lot. Like I really needed a 1 month digital detox after. But it's important to take a moment to pause and just meditate, and like, if you know, just wind down the mind from.
Farah, I may be the wrong person to ask this question, but
Yeah.
what does a girl wear then? If you can't wear high heels, then what's the alternative?
You cannot wear high heels in Davos during January. You can't. Everyone's wearing snow boots. You have to. There's no way. I mean, you wear snow boots to get around, and if you really need to wear heels, obviously you have to take it in your backpack or something and change in the venue.
Okay.
There's no way you could walk in like knee deep snow. Like it's just not possible, and it's freezing.
And there's no taxis.
You need to be warm as well. But you know, obviously you need to dress smart too. But yeah, I mean, you can get some really nice stuff online with boots and stuff. And then yeah, the other last part I would say is that obviously it does take a lot of time to get around, because like if you're not staying in Davos itself, a lot of people stay in clusters. The security measures are, you know, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. There are military tanks. Not a single human being can get through the border between clusters and Davos without their passport being, you know, identified, without their car being searched, like all of that stuff. So, and therefore it adds on a much longer time to get between clusters and Davos. So obviously a lot of people take the train for that reason between both. It's only about 20 minutes, but yeah, those would be my my tips. And I'm aware we're kind of running a bit out of time, so I just want to flip it around a little bit and ask if you guys have anything you want to ask each other, you know, about this whole experience before we wrap up. Gaia, how about you?
I actually have one for you, because you held a couple of panels that were basically one-to-ones interviews. Deepak Chopra is a great example. There were a couple more. So maybe whether you have tips on how to moderate an interview, basically. So a one person only panel, in such a way that it's not boring and flat, but it brings out different, flavors, and sort of like it gives a 360 portrayal of that person, because obviously you have more time, and the focus of the conversation is on their expertise and their experience and so on. So maybe whether you had some tips, and in particular how you handled the Deepak Chopra interview.
Yes, this was a very stressful one, and I remember asking both of you to help me out, help a sister out, and come up with some questions. But in the end, it's and you both did, obviously, and that was, and really appreciate that. But for me, it was that, of course, this is someone who for more than a decade, I have been reading his books. I've been meditating to his meditations. One of the songs that came out a long time ago was like one of the songs I played so much in my Buddha bar sets that had his voice in it. I mean, it's so many spheres, right? And the mindset I always get into when I interview someone, and I don't always achieve it, of course, you cannot always have 100% success rate, but it is that I want this interview to be one of the best interviews they have ever had in their life. And that's a very hard standard to meet, because someone like Deepak, someone like Carl Cox, who we've had on the show, of course, they've been interviewed almost every other day of their life. So how do you create that experience for them? And that requires a very deep level of thinking. That requires talking about things that not your average Joe would talk about in an interview. As you guys may know on this podcast, one of the first things that we dissect with someone is the meaning of their name. And we did the same with Deepak. We opened up that conversation with him about the meaning of his name, and it was so relevant to his path and what he does in life. And also having the creative control over the subject of the discussion. I wanted to talk about the spiritual codes of success, because to me, I think that is the most important thing that I wanted to achieve in that interview. Was like, there are many successful people. I mean, everyone in the room in Davos, in some, however you measure success, they must be successful in some shape or form to be there. And at a certain point, it's not about money, but at the same time, this obsession with money and power is it's created conflict and war and death and so many disgusting things, inhumane things. So how can we get leaders who are in the room to go much deeper within themselves and think about the spirituality behind what they do? And for me, that was the essence of this interview. I wrote it, actually, even though we all, attempted to write questions, in the end, I had like 20 minutes to really nail down what I wanted to ask him. And it was difficult. It wasn't easy, but like sometimes you thrive the best under the most highest pressure points that you can. And so, I guess that would be, my experience of that whole thing. And of course, making him feel comfortable, taking the time to introduce myself before, someone like Deepak, obviously towards the end when we opened it up for the Q&A, and then when that finished, it was like the entire room like ran to the stage, like wanting to get a picture, wanting to get questions with him. And we kind of had to prioritize, like, he knows that we need to kind of do an interview with him. So he knew that. So like, then he was able to say like, I'm going to speak to you now, but like, really sorry, I can't continue speaking with you because I have to do stuff, because he had to catch a flight, shortly after as well. So just timing as moderators, we all know, is of the essence. So how about you, Kamran? Anything you want to ask either of us or both of us?
I have a question for Gaia, which is, as a professional journalist in this space, in fintech, covering technology, sustainability, how do you stay on top of all the developments in all of these areas? How is it possible, with so much going on, for you to keep a tab on what's happening, the key developments in fintech, the key developments in sustainability, and how do you stay on top of it all? And I know it's not relevant to moderating, but I guess it is relevant to moderating when you're moderating topics of discussion in these areas. So that's good. I know it's a very broad question.
No, I think the answer is quite easy, because you said it. If you have the privilege of doing this full time, basically reading the news and keeping up with what's going on in the industry is not on top of my, mainly daily tasks, but it's what I do full time. So wake up, read my news, work on those news, book interviews, speak with a bunch of people, go to events that are somehow related to the latest developments. I'd say especially fintech, financial technology at large, is most in terms of like the amount of time I spend on these. I occasionally also cover maybe more longer features or investigations or longer term projects on sustainable innovation at large. So moving away from financial services, covering, different aspects of how technology can basically build a more sustainable, inclusive society, through different lenses. So I guess, really I call it a privilege, because having the access as a journalist or a media person or as a podcaster, as Farah is, for example, to ask questions, speak to the right people, constantly read, constantly, just basically design your days around key dates or key events, they are about to happen or they will happen, or someone in the industry or in the, press agencies you are connected with sort of give you hints about. It's really what makes the difference. So that's really a privilege that helps with maybe the moderation side of things. But yeah, maybe Farah, you have a different take on this, but you're also a trained journalist. So I guess you've been on, following the news cycle, at least for some phases of your life. And yeah, do you agree with this, or do you have some different techniques to sort of keep up with everything?
Well, as we've touched upon, time is our most precious and valuable commodity apart from health, I think, in my personal opinion. And I'm involved in so many things, whether it's music, motorsport, business, podcasts. All of these are 4 different industries in themselves. And then the podcast that we also produce at Mission Makers for clients can be in tech. So Gaia was, we were privileged to work with Gaia on a tech podcast, and it is hard to keep up with how much is happening, right? And this is where it comes down to building that very curated news feed of information. So like on my LinkedIn, I follow, even if I'm not connected to them, follow really interesting people. Could be, just giving you an example of music, could be like the editor of DJ Mag globally, could be the CEO of McLaren, for example. And you just see interesting things come through, and it's really, that's I think a part of it. And also taking time to, I think podcast is a great medium for finding out a lot of these informations as well. How often could it be that I would be in a room with I don't know, Zach Brown and Lando Norris, for example. That's never happened in my life, but I can listen to a conversation between them, and that is absolutely amazing, right? So yeah, just being particular about what and where you get your news sources from. I think, we all 3 of us are very lucky that we've turned our passions into our profession. So as you say, Gaia, it is our job every single day to actually do this, right?
100%.
So yeah,
and it's a pleasure as well. So as you said, it's a passion turned into a job, turned into a daily pleasure.
Exactly. Well, unless you guys have anything more to add, thank you. So it was such a pleasure to work with you both. I could not have
Likewise.
done, we could not have done this without you both. So I will take the time again to say thank you so much. It was absolutely amazing. It was once in a lifetime. We'll never forget what we achieved out there in 2022. And I hope to welcome you both back in Davos next year as well. So thank you guys so much, and stay tuned, because Gaia and Kamran will also share their favorite panels with us at Davos, and that will come up on Mission Makers later this autumn. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. It was lovely to chat today.
Yeah, take care, guys.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed having these conversations. If you want to grab a copy of today's show notes, then head over to missionmakers.com/Davos, where you'll also find notes from all of our previous episodes. If you're interested in talking to me about future opportunities at Davos, producing podcasts, or coming down to some of my music and motorsports events, then you can reach out to me at Mission Makers or at dj.n1nja on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you as ever for listening. Until next time, keep it laser focused.